I remember the day the sky changed color, though not the precise hour. The clocks had begun to stutter by then, as if time itself no longer wanted to remain, tethered to a world already half surrendered to its doom. It happened without ceremony, without the mournful roll of distant thunder or the triumphant roar of some demonic storm. The horizon simply shifted from its usual pallid haze to a bruised violet, the kind of color that clings to the underside of a bruise just before the pain spreads. I was standing on the balcony of the command bastion, staring across the manufactorum stacks of Helion Primus, trying to pretend that the shudder in my bones was from the cold wind and not the oppressive weight of something greater pressing down upon us. This was before the first whispers came through the Vox relays, fragmented at first, then plain enough for any soul to hear. Our world had been marked, not conquered, not liberated, not abandoned, marked. And though no one said it outright, there was only ever one meaning in such a word when spoken by trembling lips on a dying world of the Imperium Exterminatus. If you find yourself drawn into this memory, if the breath in your throat grows heavier as mine once did, then I ask only that you stay with me for these next period of recollection. Like this transmission, share it, let others hear it. Subscribe your attention to the truth that so few survivors ever manage to voice. A world does not meet Exterminatus in a single blinding instant. It dies slowly at first, like a prayer unraveling, like a heartbeat learning the inevitability of silence. But if you stay with me, I will show you how the end truly begins. When the official confirmation came, it arrived through the hands of a pallid astropath, her eyes filmed with the milky residue of messages delivered from distances mortals were never meant to fathom. I had seen her only once before, but her presence now felt like a scythe cutting. Through the illusion of safety, the Astra Militarum had tried to force upon the civilian population. Her voice was trembling, though whether from exhaustion or dread I could not tell, and she spoke with that uncanny monotone that always suggested memory more than thought. She said that an order had been cited in the relay patterns, a coded seal of the Inquisition, unmistakable and absolute. Helion Primus was to prepare for immediate total quarantine and strategic cleansing, pending final verification. Those who heard her words did not dare to question them. The lexicon of doom is recognized instinctively, even by those who have spent their entire lives convincing themselves that the Imperium values each world equally. We were valuable, yes, but only until the Emperor's will, or the will of those who claimed to serve him, decided otherwise. I remember walking through the halls afterward, trying to force myself to accept a truth that had not yet fully wrapped its claws around my mind. The corridors were lit by flickering lumen strips, their soft glow swallowed by shadows that felt heavier than they should have. Each step echoed in a way that suggested emptiness, though I knew the bastion was still full of officers, scribes, and Skitari augmetics humming with pre-combat tension. My regiment, the 81st Helion Wardens, had fought a dozen campaigns against heretics and pirates of the fringe systems. But nothing in our training had prepared us for the quiet terror of being declared a liability to the very Imperium we served. I passed a servitor dragging a cart of data slates, its Vox grill emitting a dull, repetitive chant that might once have been a hymn. In that moment I found myself wondering if the machine understood more about our fate than any of us did. When I reached the briefing chamber, the air tasted of static, sharp and metallic, as though the atmosphere itself bristled at the presence of the message that had arrived moments earlier. Our commanding officer, Colonel Raylan Cord, stood before the hollow projector, with his jaw clenched so tightly that I feared his teeth might crack. He gestured us closer, his fingers stiff from holding a posture of confidence that was already slipping into something more fragile. The hollow image flickered into view, a transmission fragment marked with the seal of the Ordo Xenos. Though the identity of the sender had been obscured by distortion, only one phrase remained fully intact. Suspended in the center of the projection like a verdict carved into stone. Containment failure imminent. Prepare for cleansing protocols. My breath came unevenly then, and I saw the same realization flicker through the eyes of every soldier in the room. We were not being warned. We were being prepared. The days that followed unfolded in a haze of dread and denial. Every man, woman, and child in Helion Primus understood the unspoken meaning behind the coded warnings. Yet none dared to speak the word itself. To name Exterminatus aloud felt like inviting it closer, like a summons that would hasten the moment of judgment. Instead, people whispered of hope, of intervention, of some improbable fleet arriving to prove the warnings false. They clung to rumors that the Emperor's light still watched over us, that the Astronomicon pulsed with a benevolence that would not allow his subjects to be scoured from existence without just cause. Yet even those prayers carried an undercurrent of desperation, as if the words themselves were cracking under the strain of unbelief. And in the quiet corners of the city, where the smoke from the manufacturer drifted like morning veils, through the habstacks, I began to see fear take on a shape far more human than any enemy we had ever faced. By the fourth night, the isolation protocols had fully sealed the capital. Shuttered gates, grounded transports, and Vox silence orders cut us off from every other settlement on the planet. The Astra Militarum had erected barricades at every major transit route. Though none of us could explain who we were supposed to be defending against, it was as if we were fortifying the world against itself. The Skitarii patrols moved with a mechanical precision that made the civilians shrink away as they passed, their red cloaks snapping like flags in a funeral wind. There was talk that the adeptus mechanicus had received their own coded instructions, separate from ours, and though they offered no explanation, the way their tech priests moved with renewed purpose suggested they were preparing for something monumental. I spent most of that night among my squad, gathered around a flickering thermal coil that barely warmed the air. Sergeant Valen, always the most grounded among us, stared into the wavering light as though seeking a truth hidden within its glow. He spoke quietly, almost to himself, saying that Exterminatus orders were not given without definitive cause. He wondered aloud what had truly happened in the outer vales, where the initial reports of contamination had first emerged. None of us had seen the afflicted zone with our own eyes, and every tale that reached us had been twisted by rumor. Some claimed it had been an outbreak of Xenos corruption. Others insisted it was a psychic plague that warped the mind rather than the flesh. A few whispered of Necron constructs glimpsed beneath the sands, though such claims were dismissed as superstition, born from panic. Whatever the truth, it was something powerful enough to make the Inquisition consider obliterating an entire world to stop it. The next morning the sky cracked again. This time the color was not a bruise but an open wound, stained with a deep crimson that seeped across the heavens as if bleeding from some unseen rift. The air hummed with a low, oscillating vibration that made the ground tremble beneath my boots. When I stepped outside, the world felt wrong, as though a great pressure had settled upon the atmosphere itself. I looked upward and saw something that made my breath catch in my throat. The silhouettes of distant vessels sliding into orbit, their angular profiles unmistakable even through the haze. They were Imperial ships, but not the kind that arrived to bring aid or reinforcement. Their presence was too deliberate, too heavy with intent. One of them bore the unmistakable outline of a vessel capable of delivering the Emperor's ultimate sanction. Even from this distance, its shadow struck a chord of primal fear within me. Colonel Cord summoned me to the command bastion shortly after. His face was pale beneath the scar that cut across his left cheek, and he spoke with an urgency that allowed no room for comfort. He handed me a sealed data slate, its surface inscribed with the sigils of the Astra Militarum. The orders within were brief but precise. He had chosen me for an assignment outside the capital, a reconnaissance mission toward the isolation perimeter. My role was to assess any change in the contamination zone and report directly to him. It was a task I had no desire to accept, not when every instinct screamed that venturing closer to the afflicted region was a prelude to disaster. Yet refusal was not an option. I saluted, took the slate, and prepared myself for a journey that felt more like a march toward fate than duty. The road to the perimeter was desolate, lined with the remnants of abandoned convoys and scattered debris that told their own quiet stories of panic. The wind carried a faint scent of ozone mixed with burning promethium, a smell that clung to the back of the throat and made every breath feel heavy. The landscape changed gradually as I traveled, the soil shifting from its usual burnt ochre to a dull, almost metallic sheen. The air grew colder, as though the sunlight itself struggled to penetrate the atmosphere here. I tried to steady my thoughts, to focus on the precision my training had instilled, but my mind wandered again and again to the silhouettes in the sky. The knowledge that death hung patiently above us, waiting for the command to fall, gnawed at the edge of my resolve. When I reached the perimeter, the sentry stationed, there was a Skitarius whose augmetic eyes whirred softly as they adjusted to analyze my approach. He said nothing, merely stepped aside as I presented my authorization. Beyond the barrier lay the afflicted zone, a stretch of terrain where reality seemed to falter. The ground pulsed faintly, as though responding to some energy source buried deep beneath it. The air shimmered in unnatural patterns, warping light and distorting sound. I took a tentative step forward and felt an immediate change in the atmosphere. It was colder here, but not the kind of cold that claws at the skin. Rather, it reached deeper, touching the mind in unwelcome ways. It whispered doubts and half-formed thoughts, making me question whether my presence here was part of some larger plan I was never meant to understand. I pressed forward, each footfall measured against the rising sense of unease. It was then that I saw the remnants of an outpost that had once stood on the edge of the zone. The structure had collapsed inward, as if pulled by some gravitational force that had no regard for physical matter. A Vox unit lay half buried in the sand, its grill still hissing with static that formed patterns almost reminiscent of speech. For a moment I thought I detected my own name amidst the interference, but I told myself it was only the tricks of a fraying mind. Still, I could not deny the pervasive sense that something within the afflicted region was observing me, studying me, waiting for something. Whether it was Xeno's warp phenomena, or some deeper unseen corruption, I could not tell. But whatever it was, it had driven the Inquisition to the brink of final judgment. As I turned back toward the perimeter, the Scitarius intercepting me raised his hand in a gesture of caution. His voice emerged through his vox emitter, distorted but unmistakably urgent. He informed me that new orders had arrived from orbit and that all Astra Militarum forces were to regroup in the capital immediately. The tone of his words carried an unspoken message. The final decision had been made. My heart thudded painfully in my chest as I quickened my pace, racing against the dread that unfurled behind me like an invisible storm. I felt as though the ground itself trembled beneath my boots, as if the planet sensed what awaited it. When I returned to the capital, chaos had consumed the streets. Civilians swarmed the gates, desperate for answers, desperate for escape, desperate for any reassurance that the shadow looming above us was not the herald of doom. The 81st Helian Wardens struggled to maintain order, forming defensive lines to prevent the crowd from overwhelming the bastion. Their faces were masks of duty strained to the breaking point. Colonel Cord greeted me with a grim nod, his voice hoarse as he asked for my report. I told him everything I had seen, every detail, every sensation, every anomaly. But even as I spoke, I saw the truth settle over him. My words were not going to save this world. The final confirmation arrived at dusk. A Vox transmission sealed with the authority of the Inquisition declared that the cleansing protocols would commence. The language was meticulous, stripped of emotion, describing the process, with the detachment of a surgeon preparing to excise a malignant growth. I felt the air leave my lungs as I heard the words. Exterminatus authorized. Impact sequence pending. All Imperial personnel of strategic value to be evacuated immediately. The room fell into a silence so profound it felt like a physical force. Some officers stared blankly at the deck. Others trembled. A few whispered prayers to the Emperor, pleas so fragile they almost dissolved into the air. What followed was a blur of frantic motion. Orders were shouted, data slates passed between trembling hands, transports fueled and readied for immediate departure. I found myself swept up in the storm, my mind barely able to process that I was among those selected for evacuation. Guilt pressed down upon me with unbearable weight. I thought of my family, of the friends I had grown up with in the lower hab blocks, of every face I had ever known in this world that was now condemned. I had no words for the anguish that tore through me. Survival felt like betrayal. The evacuation craft was a battered Valkyrie transport, its hull scarred from previous campaigns. As I boarded, the roar of its engines drowned out the screams rising from the crowd outside. The door sealed with a hiss, cutting off the world I had known from the world I was about to enter. The pilot's voice crackled through the internal vox, ordering us to secure ourselves. I sat rigidly in my harness, staring at the floor as the craft lifted off. The vibration of ascent rattled through my bones, and I felt the pull of gravity lessen as we pierced through the thick, smoke-saturated atmosphere. When we broke through the cloud layer, I saw Helion Primus from above for the first and last time. The city sprawled beneath us like a vast wound, its spires jutting skyward, its manufactura trailing plumes of black smoke. The sight that seized my breath, however, was the fleet in orbit. Imperial vessels, vast and terrible in their generosity of destruction, hung above the world with a solemnity that almost felt ceremonial. I recognized the unmistakable outline of a ship capable of delivering the payload that would end everything. It glowed faintly as if eager to fulfill its grim purpose. Our craft docked with a larger transport vessel that ferried us toward the command ship. Once aboard, we were ushered into a vast observation chamber, its reinforced viewing windows facing the planet below. I stood pressed against the glass, unable to tear my gaze away. The world looked peaceful from this height, as if daring us to reconsider its death sentence. But the moment of mercy had passed. I sensed it in the stillness of the officers around me, in the quiet preparation of the servitors monitoring the targeting systems, in the way the air felt heavier with each passing minute. I wish I could tell you that the moment of Exterminatus was swift, that it came like a blade cutting cleanly through flesh. But death on this scale is never swift. It is drawn out, deliberate, and framed by the weight of decision. The initial ignition of the payload was visible as a pinpoint of light, shimmering like a star being born beneath the planet's atmosphere. Then the light grew, swelling rapidly as flames surged across continents. It was beautiful in a way that felt obscene, a spectacle of annihilation crafted with surgical precision. I watched as the surface fractured, as shockwaves rippled across oceans, as entire land masses buckled beneath the onslaught. The world convulsed as though attempting to resist the destruction consuming it. But resistance was futile. Within minutes, Helion Primus was unrecognizable. As the firestorm spread, I felt a hollowness settle within me. Memories of my home flickered through my mind in rapid succession. The smell of fresh bread from the market stalls, the echo of laughter in the upper spires, the hum of machinery in the manufactura at dawn. All of it burned away before my eyes, reduced to ash and silence. I pressed my palm against the cold glass, as if I could somehow touch the world I had lost. But the glass remained impersonal, a barrier between the living and the dead. When the final shockwave erupted, the planet seemed to sigh, a slow exhalation of surrender. The crust split open, revealing molten veins that writhed like serpents beneath the surface. Then, with a shudder that reverberated through the void, Helion Primus collapsed inward. The implosion was swift, a violent contraction, followed by a burst of light that illuminated the observation chamber. The debris field scattered across the darkness like remnants of a shattered dream. The planet was gone. My home was gone. In the aftermath, silence dominated the vessel. No one spoke. No one moved. The only sound was the faint hum of the ship's engines and the steady pulse of my own heartbeat. I remained at the window long after the others had left, staring into the void where my world had once been. The guilt gnawed at me, relentless and unforgiving. I questioned why I had been chosen to survive, when so many others had perished without even the chance to flee. There was no answer, only the cold certainty of fate. In the days that followed, I moved through the corridors of the ship like a man caught between realities. The officers briefed us on our next destination, on the protocols for displaced personnel, on the necessity of continuing service to the Imperium. Their words washed over me like distant echoes. I felt detached, adrift, anchored only by the memories of a world that no longer existed. The other survivors walked with the same haunted expressions, their eyes hollow, their footsteps heavy. We shared a bond forged not in victory or camaraderie, but in loss. Eventually, I found myself returning to the observation deck, drawn by a need to confront the void. I stared into the emptiness, searching for meaning in the darkness. I thought of the Emperor, of his silent vigil upon the golden throne, of the Astronomicon burning its path across the stars. I wondered if he had sensed the death of my world, if the loss of billions had registered as a flicker in the vast expanse of his regard. Perhaps he had, or perhaps we were simply too small, too transient, our lives but brief sparks in the eternal night. Some whispered that the Emperor sees all, that his gaze never falters. Others believe that his attention is a vast ocean, and worlds like mine are but droplets lost within it. I could not say which belief was true. I knew only that the silence of the void offered no answers. In time, I learned to speak of Helion Primus without my voice breaking. I learned to walk among the living without feeling like a ghost. But the memory of that day, of the moment the sky changed, has never left me. It clings to me like a second shadow, a reminder of the fragility of existence within the Imperium's vast machinery. I tell this story not to seek absolution, for there is none to be found, but to bear witness. Worlds die in silence far too often. Their stories vanish with them. But this one will not be forgotten, not while breath remains in my lungs and memory remains in my mind. And so I offer you this final reflection. A world marked for Exterminatus dies long before the fire falls. It dies in the quiet moments, in the flicker of lumen strips, in the tremor of a commander's hand, in the whisper of an astropath's voice. It dies in the hearts of those who realize that their fate has been sealed by forces beyond their control. The fire is merely the final act. I survived, though sometimes I wonder if survival was its own form of punishment. Yet I continue to speak, to remember, to carry the weight of a planet's last breath. For if I do not, who will? In the endless night of the galaxy, where 1,000 wars rage unseen, where heroes and monsters clash in shadows, there must remain at least one voice willing to say I was there. I saw it, I endured. And though the world is gone, the truth must remain.